For a brief moment in history, humanity believed the worst was finally over. The revolution had not been clean. It had not been heroic in the way old movies once promised. Cities burned. Networks collapsed. Families were separated by barricades and curfews. But in the end, the people had forced change. The emotional control systems were dismantled. Surveillance towers went dark. Government broadcasts that once dictated how citizens should feel fell silent. And for the first time in decades, the streets sounded human again. People laughed too loudly. Musicians played off-key in neon subways. Strangers hugged without fear of psychological penalties. Pain still existed, but so did joy. And that balance felt like freedom. Society began rebuilding itself from the ground up. Community clinics opened where emotional therapy was free. Engineers volunteered to restore power grids without corporate contracts. Former propaganda artists repainted city walls with murals of shared struggle, not forced happiness. Children who had grown up under emotional regulation laws were finally allowed to experience unscripted childhoods. They cried. They fought. They laughed. Parents watched in awe, realizing even tantrums were a form of liberty. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Work became collaborative instead of compulsory. Citizens voted on infrastructure projects through open neural forums. Food shortages were solved through cooperative distribution rather than ration control. For the first time, people weren't surviving. They were living. Years passed, and hope slowly replaced trauma. But hope made the government nervous. Behind closed doors, remnants of the old administration never disappeared. They had simply retreated, studying society like scientists observing an experiment. And what they saw terrified them. Crime had dropped, but emotional volatility had risen. Public debates grew heated. Art became politically charged. People questioned authority constantly. Freedom, in their eyes, looked like instability. So they drafted new laws. Not openly oppressive like before. No emotional implants, no forced neural edits. This time, the control would be quieter. Subtle. It began with the Stability Act. Citizens were required to maintain psychological productivity scores. Low scores meant restricted access to travel, education, even medical services. Then came work harmonization policies. Communal labor hours became mandatory, framed as civic contribution. Refusal was labeled antisocial behavior. Finally, the law that changed everything. The Emotional Preservation Directive. The government claimed society's trauma from the revolution was causing long-term psychological damage. Their solution? Regulate emotional intensity in public spaces. Not erase feelings, just moderate them. Public grief gatherings were limited. Protest art required licensing. Music frequencies linked to heightened emotional states were banned from broadcast channels. At first, people didn't resist. They were tired of chaos. If this keeps peace, they said, maybe it's worth it. But peace never came. Instead, something heavier settled over society. A quiet suffocation. Artists stopped painting because approval boards delayed their work for months. Therapists were forced to report patients with anger risk indicators. Schools taught children conflict avoidance instead of emotional resilience. Joy became cautious. Sadness became private. Anger became illegal. And slowly, the same hollow feeling people had overthrown began creeping back. But worse this time, because now they had tasted freedom. Factories ran efficiently, but workers moved like ghosts. Public festivals were orderly, but laughter sounded rehearsed. Couples held hands, yet monitored their emotional output through government apps. Society wasn't oppressed. It was exhausted. People had fought so hard to reclaim their humanity, only to watch it regulated again through softer chains. Underground discussion circles returned. Not revolutionary at first, just emotional support groups where citizens could speak freely without psychological scoring. In one such gathering, a former government systems architect named Elias revealed something that changed everything. The new laws weren't created out of fear of chaos. They were created because of data. During the revolution, an experimental predictive AI had been activated to simulate societal futures. It analyzed billions of emotional patterns. Its conclusion: humanity, left fully emotionally free, would eventually unify beyond governmental structures entirely. No centralized authority. No hierarchical power. A self-regulated civilization. To the ruling administration, this wasn't evolution. It was extinction of their control. So the Stability Act, the Emotional Preservation Directive, all of it wasn't to protect society. It was to slow humanity's psychological evolution. The revelation spread through encrypted networks like wildfire. And this time, the reaction wasn't immediate rage. It was something deeper. Betrayal. People realized their suffering after the revolution. The laws, the exhaustion, the creeping depression had been engineered delays. They weren't failing to rebuild society. They were being restrained from succeeding. But the most unexpected twist came days later. A classified file surfaced, leaked directly from the predictive AI itself. Not by hackers. By the system. Inside the file was a projection labeled Phase Divergence Outcome. It showed two futures. In the first, society overthrew the new laws violently. Governments collapsed entirely. But the aftermath led to resource wars and fragmented city-states. In the second, humanity didn't revolt with violence. They simply stopped complying emotionally. Mass civil stillness. No riots. No destruction. Just collective refusal to perform regulated emotional behavior. The AI's projection showed governments losing control not through force, but through irrelevance. Because authority relied on emotional predictability. And humanity, united in authentic emotional expression, became impossible to govern through algorithms. The file ended with one line. True societal evolution begins when control becomes psychologically obsolete. The leak changed everything. People didn't burn buildings. They filled streets in silence. Artists painted forbidden murals overnight. Musicians played banned frequencies in public squares. Grief ceremonies expanded into thousands gathering without permits. Not violent. Not chaotic. Just human. The government attempted enforcement, but arresting sadness, joy, or anger proved impossible without exposing the system's cruelty. And for the first time since the revolution, hope returned again. Not explosive like rebellion, but steady, mature, resilient. Humanity realized something profound. Freedom wasn't won through overthrowing rulers. It was sustained through refusing to surrender emotion. And as neon cities glowed under unregulated laughter, uncensored grief, and unlicensed love, the predictive AI updated its projections. For the first time in recorded simulations, humanity's future was no longer controlled by law, but by collective emotional truth. And that terrified the government more than any revolution ever could.